Qualifying for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is over, and surprise surprise, it's a Red Bull on pole position, but it is not Max Verstappen. Instead, it is his teammate Sergio Perez, and Max Verstappen did not even make it into Q3. What on earth happened in a crazy qualifying, and what did we learn from the data which could be useful for the Grand Prix? Well, that's what we're going to be taking a look at and finding out today in this last little preview for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. The majority of viewers are not currently subscribed to the channel, and if you're one of those, I would really appreciate it if you just tapped that little sub button. Now, let's get to the video. Firstly, I will be talking about Aston Martin, Ferrari and Red Bull a little later on. But let's start with something that I didn't realise was illegal. During the first qualifying session, Logan Sargeant had a lap time deleted for track limits at the final corner. And I was very surprised and a little bit confused as to how this could have happened. Like, there's no way he could have extended, because if he cut the inside, there's a wall on the inside. And if he went wide on the outside, well, he'd be right into the wall. But it turns out he didn't actually cut the corner. Instead, he cut the track on the straight run to the line. He dipped one wheel over the white line just before crossing the start-finish line, and that was enough for the FIA to delete his lap time, which I thought was a bit harsh. Sargeant didn't exactly deserve that in my opinion. This decision by the FIA infuriated Sargeant and pretty much set him up for what was to come for the rest of Q1. In his second run, he spun at the far chicane and somehow managed to keep it out of the wall by literally just a few millimeters. And then on his final run, Logan locked up going into turn 1 and brushed the wall on the exit, which damaged his car and essentially ended his session. It's a shame because his first run was actually good enough and probably could have got him through to Q2, but it's a shame that it just got deleted. Also out in Q1, which was a surprise, was Lando Norris in the McLaren. Now, yes, McLaren have not exactly had the best start to the year, but things in Saudi were a little bit better for the McLaren team, and they are really not back row contenders this weekend. But sadly for Norris, it all came to an end a little bit too early. On his first qualifying lap going into the final corner, Lando hit the inside wall and damaged a track rod, essentially ending his session right there and then. But it was interesting to see that the mechanics were rushing around trying desperately to fix the car so that they could possibly get Lando back out on track. But why would they do that when it was clear that a broken track rod would take longer than the allotted time they had remaining to fix? Well, the reason was, it's not just those two drivers that made a mistake. In Q1, Alonso spun, Verstappen had a moment, Sainz had a moment, as did Leclerc, and also one of the AlphaTauris had a spin. But somehow they all avoided contact with the wall. But if one of them did just hit a wall and cause a red flag, then definitely there would have been enough time for McLaren to just about fix the car. Alongside these two drivers, who else was out in Q1? Well, it was the two AlphaTauris, which is probably not a great surprise, and also the Williams of Alex Albon. Albon just could not hook it all together. As I mentioned in a previous video, the Williams is a very fast car in a straight line, but it is massively lacking downforce due to its simplicity. This means that in the race, Williams could make up a bit of ground if they get caught in some DRS battles. But what about the McLaren of Lando Norris? Can Lando recover since he is essentially out of position? Sadly, I don't think he really will. The reason for this is because, as we can see from the data, McLaren is a very slow car in a straight line. How slow, might you ask? Well, the fastest speed by a McLaren was 19 kilometers per hour, slower than the fastest car, which was the Red Bull. And overall, they were 6 kilometers per hour slower than the next nearest car, which means that they have essentially got no straight line speed at all. With this in mind, I have a feeling that his teammate Oscar Piastri in the Grand Prix will probably sink like a stone if he does not get caught up in a DRS train. For once for Piastri, it's going to be very important that he essentially gets into a DRS train and hopes that someone ahead makes a mistake. Speaking of the data, let's take a little bit more of a deep dive into the data to see what we can learn. The slowest car out on track overall is the AlphaTauri. The car is really just not that good. Not only is it slow, but it is draggy as well. And how can we tell this? Well, let's take a look at this speed chart once again and compare the two Honda powered cars of Red Bull and AlphaTauri. Look at the top speed. Red Bull was able to hit 338 km per hour in qualifying. However, the AlphaTauri with the same power unit was only able to hit about 327 km per hour. That is an 11 km per hour or 6.8 mile per hour difference. That is pretty substantial when you want to try and overtake someone. This means that AlphaTauri is too draggy and it's just not efficient enough. If the car was faster around the circuit, it would not be so bad, but because it is just slow in qualifying, it means they pretty much have no chance in this race unless something major happens in front. Another car which has a similar situation to the AlphaTauri is the Haas car. Now, that's just in terms of race performance. Haas, on the other hand, has a very fast car in a straight line, but as we've seen from data from practice and also from the Bahrain Grand Prix, the Haas car is a very slow race car, which means that Haas, even though they got into Q2, are probably going to find themselves going backwards in the Grand Prix as the stint wears on, and I can picture that the battle for who will be the best of the midfield rest will be between Haas, Alfa Romeo, Williams, and AlphaTauri, as all four of those teams seem to be a little bit away from the rest of the chasing pack. Now let's get into the top three teams and look at the data and see what we can learn. Firstly, let's start with the Aston Martin team. For Aston, this qualifying session pretty much went as well as it could have gone. Alonso is P2 on the grid and Lance Stroll will be starting in P5. However, there is one major issue with the Aston Martin which could really hurt them in the Grand Prix, and that is they are very slow in a straight line. Let's take a look at the fastest laps from Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso in Q3. This is provided by the website F1 Tempo, which you can find in the description below. And what do these graphs tell us? Well, what it tells us is that as the speed increases, there is one driver who has a very distinct advantage, and that is Sergio Perez. And it is not just Red Bull who Aston Martin are lacking top speed against. Let's now replace Lance Stroll with Charles Leclerc, and you can see the exact same thing. Aston Martin are slower than their rivals in a straight line. For Fernando Alonso, it means if he cannot pass Sergio Perez off the line, he's probably not going to overtake him at all in the race. If he does pass Perez, then he needs to break the toe as quickly as possible, otherwise he will just get re-overtaken. For Lance Stroll, this lack of straight line speed means that whilst yes, he could probably get past the Mercedes of Russell, there is a good chance he will be vulnerable to Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen as they come through the field. For me, Alonso is fast enough everywhere else that he can probably hang on to a podium position, but for Lance Stroll, he could be staring down at a P6 or maybe even a P7 finish. Let's now look at the Ferrari. For Ferrari, they kind of have the wrong driver taking the power unit penalty. Charles Leclerc in the first two race weekends has clearly been the fastest driver of the two. In Bahrain, he was dominating his teammate until he broke down, and so far this weekend, Leclerc has been a long way ahead of Carlos Sainz, and once again in qualifying, Leclerc was the driver who is really putting the Ferrari where it needs to be. Whereas Sainz was struggling a lot. He had to do additional runs in Q2 to make it through to Q3, and he was a long way away from Leclerc. He was half a second behind his teammate and qualified in 5th, but he will be starting in 4th place. For Sainz, he really needs to just try and keep his nose clean and build up as big of a gap as possible to the cars behind. Ideally, he needs to get past George Russell at the start of the race and really hope that the slower cars behind can hold up Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc for long enough that they cannot come back and overtake Sainz by mid-race. For Charles, he absolutely maximised his qualifying potential. Realistically, there was no way he was going to get pole position, and really he only got on the front row due to Red Bull reliability issues. And what can Leclerc do from 12th place? Honestly, I think if the race goes well, he could still finish in the top 5 this weekend. In his hands, the Ferrari has been with Fernando Alonso in both qualifying and race trim based on practice. He should find his way past Joe, Hülkenberg and Piastri without too many issues due to those drivers having significantly worse race pace than Leclerc. But he might struggle a little bit with Gasly, especially if Gasly does get some DRS from a car in front. Gasly will probably be able to use DRS to defend himself against the Ferrari driver of Charles Leclerc if Gasly can be, I don't know, battling with, let's say, Lewis Hamilton or George Russell or maybe Lance Stroll. So let's say he gets past him, but then what about the Mercedes drivers? Hamilton has been struggling all weekend, so I imagine Leclerc will find a way past him. And with Stroll, it could be difficult, but I do think he is faster than Stroll in the Aston Martin. And in a straight line, as the data showed from earlier, Ferrari are much faster in a straight line. Therefore, Leclerc should easily find a way past Lance Stroll if he gets into a DRS battle against the Aston Martin. But what about Red Bull? For Max Verstappen, he should have been on pole position. Let's be honest, there's no other way around it. In Q1, Max was half a second clear of the next closest car, which was of course his teammate Perez. In fact, Verstappen's Q1 time would have seen him in 4th place for the race. He is pretty much untouchable, and I think even though he is starting in 15th place, Max will at the very least finish the race on the podium, and if there's a safety car after he has made his way past a few of the slower cars, then I can see Max Verstappen winning the Grand Prix quite easily. That is, of course, if his car finishes the race. In Bahrain, there were moments where Max was talking about transmission issues, but it didn't really affect him too much. However, in Saudi, those transmission issues reared their ugly head, and it caused Max to retire from qualifying. Not only this, but Red Bull has changed some parts as a precaution on both Sergio Perez and Verstappen's car. So that tells me that whilst yes, Red Bull is in a league of their own when it comes to pace, when it comes to reliability, they are very similar to Ferrari in the sense that they are fragile. And this is going to be a concern for them going into the race. For Sergio Perez, this is his best opportunity to win a Grand Prix this year. With Max being so far down the field and their car in general being so much better than the rest, if Perez can stay ahead of Alonso off the line, then there's a very good chance that Sergio Perez will win the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. But what will actually happen? For me, I'm going to say that the top 5 in this race will be as follows. In 5th place, it'll be Carlos Sainz. 4th place will be his teammate Charles Leclerc. In 3rd place will be Fernando Alonso. 2nd place, Max Verstappen. And Sergio Perez will win the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. But the question is, what do you guys think? In the comments down below, let me know what is your top 5 for today's race. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.